In putting together this program, obviously, a lot of us look back at smallpox with stories, but also the looking at what has been built on smallpox. And lastly, what does smallpox have contribute to the future? Somebody asked me to describe Bill Foege the other day, and I said, Bill Foege's vision starts where mine leaves off. So let's give a hand and welcome to Bill.
Thank you, Stanley. What a great day for an old man.
Is that for me or for you?
For me. It's been remarkable to hear all of this, and one of the things that went through my mind was years ago when I found out why dogs put their head out of the window of cars. It turns out it's an olfactory rush. They get more scents in a shorter period of time than they ever do ordinarily, and that's why they're so addicted to doing it. It's been a cerebral rush just to hear all of these things going on. And I'm reminded that Don Millar, when he was contributing so many people to the African program, wrote me a letter and he said, I have no idea if these people are helping you with smallpox eradication or not, but don't stop asking for them, because they come back different people. And those of you who are EIS officers, you can sense the passion and the pride and the fact that this is quite different when you have these experiences. I go back to India with some frequency, and I always mark my visits by looking for smallpox scars on the street. And now you can't find anyone under the age of 33 with smallpox scars. Now that's remarkable. Some weeks ago, Brian Greene in the New York Times wrote, "Science is a language of hope and inspiration." And I always tell students, love science, just absolutely love science, but don't worship it. There's something better than science, and that's science with a moral compass. And when smallpox people get together, I'm reminded of these are people who practice science with a moral compass. The 20th century in science was the century of physics. The 21st century will be the century of biology. We've spent the last 50 years understanding that 4-letter alphabet that explains every species that's ever been on the earth. I mean, that is remarkable. We'll spend the next 50 years learning how to write with that alphabet. And I keep thinking that if we had Pulitzer Prizes for that kind of writing, there would be many of them that we will see. So it's amazing. We will incidentally see a shift, because we've already seen it, of the leadership in biology from the United States to India and China. And I can tell you the United States will never regain that leadership again. There are lots of reasons for this, but the shift is taking place. I would like to look at just a few of the things that we will see in the future, and none of this is science fiction. This is absolute trajectory from where we're going right now. The tools. We now, with malaria, have the genome for people, for the mosquito, for the malaria parasite. All of my career, I've heard, we're on the threshold of a malaria vaccine. We now have a malaria vaccine, and it's going to become better. There's a renaissance of drugs in the pipeline for malaria. And you've heard about bed nets, and these last 2 reports are just remarkable what's happening in 2 different areas. With the Gates Foundation announcement that they would seek malaria eradication, you know they've had a lot of pushback. And just a few weeks ago, they asked me, how would I suggest that they handle this pushback? And I reminded them what happened 25 years ago when CDC looked at, could we interrupt measles transmission in this country? And there were many people at CDC that said, don't select that as an objective because we'll never reach it and CDC will look silly. There are ways to hurt CDC's reputation, but lofty goals don't fall into that category. And we decided And we decided if we don't choose the ultimate objective, we will never know the ultimate barriers. And so we selected, we're going to interrupt transmission of measles in this country, and every week we spent 30 minutes reviewing what was happening. We found one barrier after another, and every time we identified one, we solved the problem until the ultimate barrier, which was the importation. We were having 2 importations of measles a week from other countries. And PAHO then started programs that became very effective in the Americas. That's been reduced. But all of our cases of measles now in this country can be traced to importation. So my advice to the Gates Foundation was, don't argue the objective. Simply get the critics to tell you what are the barriers to reaching that goal. And then work on those barriers and find what the ultimate barriers are, even if we never reach that goal. The second example, tuberculosis. Those of you who have gone through the agony of BCG and never quite knowing what is in this vaccine will be heartened to know that there are now 6 tuberculosis vaccines in human trials. Now that's just absolutely remarkable. And as you know, we have a diagnostic test now that can in 2 days provide turnaround on whether you have a resistant case of tuberculosis. 2 of many examples. In vaccines, they're going to get better, and we're going to have more of them. And my grandchildren, when they take their children in for immunization, they will get dozens of routine vaccines, but in addition, each child's disk of their genome will be put into a computer, and they will get a special vaccine for dozens of conditions related to their own genome. And the global vaccine system will be wireless. And with an iris read, any place in the world you'll be able to tell which immunizations has this person had and which immunizations are still needed. And we will incidentally no longer have needles and syringes in the immunization program. And we'll have vaccines for a host of conditions, not just infectious diseases, but for cancers and for addiction. Beyond the tools, resources. In the developing world, we will look back and we will someday realize that the turning point, the tipping point for resources can be traced to the year 2000 and 2 people, Melinda and Bill Gates. Foundations increased what was being put into global health, and then governments followed. One example, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, the Gates put in $750 million 8 years ago, expecting that governments would start matching that, and it didn't happen. And I was so worried that they would lose interest. 3 years ago, they put in another $750 million, and within days, Norway and the UK more than matched what they had put in. See, there's an incubation period for ideas, and governments had to know that the Gates were serious and that they would follow this up. Just as with malaria eradication, to have 2 tenacious people who are not going to let malaria eradication go, this is quite different than we've ever had before. But what's the biggest change from my perspective and what will happen in global health? Global health people will stop thinking like poor people. In the past, we've always thought we didn't deserve more resources because we didn't get it. And so we always made do with what we had, and we always had less than what we needed. And it never entered our minds, never, that some rich person might get interested in global health. And if we had ever thought of that, it never would have entered our mind that the richest couple in the world might get interested in global health. And if that had entered our mind, we never would have thought they'll get the next richest person also interested in global health. And so this is going to make us think in a different way and be much bolder. But in addition to resources, there's increased political interest that won't die. I think it started with the Carters when they became the William Wilberforces of global health. They elevated global health from discussions with ministers of health to discussions with heads of state. They even got 2 former heads of state in Africa involved in global health, and Don Hopkins has worked with both of them. So global health is now a permanent part of the political agenda, and we're reminded at the death of Jesse Helms that even the most unexpected people became interested in global health at the end. Why? Because global health now turns out to be good politics. Lincoln Stephan, about the time I was born, wrote that the greatest song has not yet been sung. The greatest poem has not yet been written. And I add that the greatest global health has not yet been seen. Toynbee's prediction that we will see global health equity is achievable. It's not simply a lofty goal. And while the tipping point for global health investment may be due to Melinda and Bill Gates, the tipping point for the demonstration that it is possible to organize for better global health outcomes can be traced to the people in this room, demonstrating that it was possible to choose a global outcome. It was possible to develop a coalition. It was possible to organize a global army in pursuit of that outcome, and with unwarranted optimism, make that outcome a reality. And for that, the world thanks all of you forever. Thank you.